All right. Lynn, thanks for coming on with me, and thanks for volunteering to yeah, do this publicly. I really appreciate it. I always feel like it takes a lot of courage to sign up for these like, oh, you're gonna talk to Jeff about your work publicly. So yeah, I really appreciate it. Um, talk to me a little bit about where you are in your author journey.
I still haven't published my first book, and there are people that are poking and prodding me, so I'm sorry.
How many have you written?
Just this one.
Yeah.
So I published a short story through Sasha Black's the Rebel Diaries
Anthologies.
anthology.
Yeah, that's great.
Which was amazing.
It's a fantastic anthology. So good.
Yeah, I managed to sneak mine in amongst some other amazing stories. Nice. Then this is the first novel that I've written and self-edited and then sent to a developmental editor, and there's some quite slightly meaty changes I need to make. I've been needing to make them since October. Okay. So I'm just kind of slogging.
Plot changes or character changes, or are you missing some beats? What's the
it's plot. So it's a series, and there were some things I had in my head as happening in the next book, but the main character wasn't really active enough in the first one, so I pulled some of the second one into the first, which just interrupts some of the emotional flow.
Sure.
So I just need to figure out where those go in, what bits then have to get taken out, and then how to make emotionally that works.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough, especially when you have the first book locked in your brain. That kind of rewrite can be tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how can I help today?
I feel
it's like the worst question to be asked, right? You're like, no, I don't know.
No, so I'm basically tricking you into being into parenting me for an hour.
Deal. I'm in.
I know that I need to get these characters' voices down, so that when I step away and come back, I don't need to spend as long to remind myself of them. And I know I need to do it, and I'm the type of person that I know I need to do something, so I'll never do it. So I needed
you just need somebody to hold your hand and be like,
yeah, I need someone to sit me down and put it all in front of me and force me to do it.
Okay. Talk to me about your writing / editing process. What are you doing? Because so we could just go through
meant to be a process.
Okay, that's a good start. So there's not actually, it's whatever works for you. But we could sit down and I could just rock through these voices with you and be like, okay, here's how you need to write them. But if we don't gear the structure of the voices and how you're going to connect to the voices around how you actually write, it won't help you. So are you writing at a routine time or just at random?
Oh, I don't do routines.
Okay. No, I write at random. I write okay, yeah. I've got an hour. I've got an hour here. I've got an hour there. So you're writing because you've got a day job? I do have a day job,
but the day job doesn't really affect, I'm not lazy. I'm not going to call myself lazy. That's something.
No,
it's a negative.
Yeah.
But I go through phases. So quite often I'll go through a phase of getting up and writing first thing in the morning, and then for some reason I just will stop doing that for a while.
Okay.
So yeah.
There's to be clear, there's no right way to do this. Yeah. There's no oh, you have to be right. I remember when I started, somebody told me you had to get morning pages out. You had to get up in the morning and write. And I get out of bed and my day is cranking. I got to go make dinner. Well, I got to go make breakfast and lunch for all of the children before they go to school. I have my own crap to do. Not to mention that in the morning, my brain is not engaged. So like trying to write morning pages was a disaster for me. I write it, I tend to write like really late at night. Like that's because that's when I'm like in the most chill place where I can actually like access creativity over my anxiety. Um, so that being said, like there's no right or wrong way. So don't like as I ask you these questions, don't feel bad about what you do. Just own it. Like so, I have to write at different times. I write when the spark kind of comes and then I sit out. Is that fair to say about how you're writing? Like there's moments where you feel really inspired and you're like cranking it out. And then there's moments where you're like, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, there's just like periods in my life where like November to December at work is just a very emotionally taxing time.
Yeah.
So I don't have it in me to then write characters going through hell, you know?
Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing. It seems to be more of a seasonal, you know, thing than a day-to-day, whether or not you have the time. It seems to be more like phases.
Okay. Do you always write in the same place?
No.
Okay. So you're moving around when you write.
Mhm.
Um, do you keep any kind of like plot book? Like how do you know what you're gonna write next?
I originally started with like a physical notebook Bible thing.
Okay.
And then I've got a new notebook where I was trying to write down like every writing session I'd have it, and then I'd take notes on kind of like what I was thinking and what I'd done.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I'm basically trying to discuss. I don't do that so much anymore. So
Sure.
it's mostly like in my head. I haven't quite figured out the best way to. So
Okay.
lots of notebooks
Gotcha.
is kind of the main thing.
But you're physically writing on things. You're not keeping notebooks in your computer. You're like pen and
I'm
paper.
I'm physically pen and paper for like notes and thinking, and
Okay.
then I have Scrivener for the writing.
Okay, good to know. I want you to think of these things that you're using, these processes you're using as like tools, right? They're like
Mhm.
hammers and screwdrivers and wrenches. It's not like one tool is better than any other tool, right? You use the tool you need at the moment. So, you might be writing in a notebook and then you're like, okay, this kind of writing in the notebook isn't helping me anymore. Put that tool aside and go find another one, right? Like use the tool you need to get the job done in the moment. So I say that because I could feel a little hesitancy in you of like, I don't know which tool I'm using. So, use the tool you got to use.
Yeah.
So as we build out your character voices, um, do you feel like they come when you sit down to write? Do the character voices come pretty easy to you, or do you have to ramp into them?
Um, I think they mostly come pretty easy, and then I'll be writing. There'll be one character that I notice sounds like the other, so it's like, okay, you've not
Okay.
connected to this character. Like, so yeah,
What do
kind of
you
varies.
are you visualizing anything before you write a character? Are you like feeling anything before you write a character? How do you lock into a character voice?
Oh man.
Sorry, these were all questions I did not prepare you for.
No, no,
Just
it's
like,
just very, when like you think a certain way and to
Mhm.
describe how you think is like very
It's very difficult. Yeah.
difficult. Um, I think I do a lot of thinking in my head before I put anything to paper.
Okay.
And then I'm afraid I vary. Sometimes I like just write out. Sometimes I'll just start writing and see what comes, and other times I like sit with a notebook and think like, okay, this is the wound. If
Gotcha.
that's the wound, then therefore they'll feel like this during an interaction, and then play that way.
Okay. Do you do any sketching? Are you an artist?
Um, I used to like to do
Okay.
art. I haven't in a while.
The reason I'm asking is because in a second we're going to pull open your characters and we're going to look at them. And my primary advice to you is going to be to simplify because what you have is great, but and very well thought out, but I could imagine it's like strapping a giant backpack onto your back before you try to take a hike. And there's like no reason to carry all of that, right? Like we can simplify and then you can feel it as you write it. The question that's going to be lurking as we talk about simplifying is, how are you going to lock into a voice before you try to write it? And so something I want you to think about, there's several different ways you can do this, right? Like, and again, there's no right way. You got to find what works for you. So a lot of times for me, for my characters especially, I'll use body position. So like I'll have a chart. I used to call it a character wheel, that's got like the character name in the middle, and then around it, it's got like the different aspects of the character's voice, which we'll look at in a minute. And then sometimes I'd put modulations around that, which, make it look like the spokes of a wheel. I would look at that, and then I would have a physical body position that would help me lock into that voice, because looking at it on a piece of paper and actually being able to like emote it are two different things. So if I was writing from, the perspective of a shy character, a lot of times I'd read the thing and then I'd look down and slump my shoulders before I started writing. And that look down and slump my shoulders, like, okay, I've got that voice in my head and now I can pop into it. Or if I was writing a character that was like super bubbly and excited, I would arch my eyebrows and sit up straight, right? Like, but that little moment gets me into the place where I'm like, okay, I got this voice. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
That's one way. I've also used colors. Like I've associated each character with a color, and then I read the voice and look at the color, and the color will lock it into place. Sometimes you can have a phrase, like give each character a phrase that they're going to say, just like, 3 or 4 words, and then, just kind of say those words to yourself before you try to write the voice, and that'll lock it into place. But so we're going to do the work for the voices, because you're writing at like times of inspiration, and because you're it's not always consistent. I'm going to encourage you to figure out some kind of physical thing you can do. Either look at a color, or have a phrase, or have a body position. There was one book I wrote where the lead character had a certain song. And so right before I wrote, I would listen to that song to get into that character's POV, right? Like, so that was a single POV book. So it was easy to have just one, just one song, right? Like, so, yeah, we need to find for you something that's going to lock you in. So, because the goal is to like spend as much time in the page as you can, and not have to spend a ton of time prepping, because you are writing at like random times. So we want to maximize your efficiency. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's going to be unique to you. So I want you to think about like what you can do as we talk about these voices. Consider like what you can do to lock in. And it may be a picture. Like, some people use pictures of actors, which is a great tool, as long as the picture becomes the voice and the voice doesn't become the picture. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the problem with using a picture of actors is that you start to limit what your character will do and say based on what that actor has done and said in the past. Again, it's not a bad way to get a diverse cast, but all of these have their limits. So you'll find the tool that works for you. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Okay.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to share my screen.
Cool.
Let's look at your voices. So we're doing can you see my screen? The right
Yeah.
screen? Okay. Sometimes they're like, can you see my screen? And people are like, yeah, I can see it. It's your email. So um sorry, I'm gonna blow this up a little bit. That's what I'm looking for. So we're writing a YA new adult. I have a question. What's the difference between YA and new adult?
That is a great question.
I don't know. I'm sincerely
New,
asking.
new, like, as a non-expert, my understanding is that YA is I don't know. God, don't shoot me if this isn't the right age, but I would imagine 12 to 13, like up
Okay,
to 18, and then new adults like university, kind of like
gotcha.
18 to 21, 22. But it's like not a marketing category used in
Yeah,
trad
yeah.
anymore. So
No, that's great. Thank you. I saw that and I was like, I don't know what that means. And so we're looking at themes of belonging and freezing as a trauma response. Part of
yeah,
what I
nice and
love,
happy.
what'd you say? Nice and happy.
Nice
That's
and
right.
happy.
Nothing. Nothing dark or sad, and having a trauma response as your primary theme. Um, we're just going full on. You've got mail in this one. It's about the way pencils smell when they're taken out of the package. So your lead character is Amelia.
Mhm.
How much of Amelia's voice is your voice on a percentage scale?
Yeah, that's like the big worry, isn't it? Not worry, the
It's not
big.
a word. It's your first book. It's like
Yeah,
if your pro tag
exactly.
is your voice, it's great. The problem is in your second series, you'll have to change that up a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, it's not, it's like a much more, I think it's a much more extroverted voice than
Okay.
my own. But
Right.
there is, I mean, I am I am a white middle class
Okay.
woman
No.
from Scotland, so
Gotcha.
the character's the same. So
Yeah. Okay. So we've got Amelia. We've got Thane, the love interest, Levin, Ivor, and then you've got this list down here. Which voice comes the easiest to you?
um, Amelia's,
Okay.
um, then well, I was going to say Thanes, but actually that's probably not entirely true.
Which voice is the most difficult?
Well, the one I'm kind of having a problem with at the moment is Marielle's.
Okay.
Um,
The mentor.
yeah, and then Ivor's is like nearly there.
Okay.
Like the ones at the bottom are like not distinct because I
Not distinct.
haven't the
Okay.
last three, I mean, I haven't written them yet, so
Gotcha.
that's fine.
Okay. So what I want to do today is give you a system that you can use to define a voice. Because what you gave me looked like Muriel's, right? It was more extensive than this for the other characters, but this is what it looked like. You gave me some information about who she is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had baseline, answers questions with questions, elegant, more purple language like thin and firm, which isn't a bad starting place, but doesn't actually help you put it on the page. And then for the other characters, you gave me modulations. Like here's how their voice is going to change. So what we need to do is we need to take this and we need to think about it. We need to take these statements of how the voice sounds, and we need to just take it a little bit further and talk about how it's going to look on the page, because that's
Mm-hmm.
what you're actually writing, right? Like you're actually putting it on the page. So we need to go into the construction of it, and we need to keep it simple at the same time. Because again, this is something you need to glance at and lock into. Does
You
that
mean
make
you
sense?
don't want an essay for each character
You
and how
don't.
they speak?
Yeah. I mean, every writer is different. Like, if you can lock into an essay, that's great. I
Yeah,
can't.
there's too much. There's too. When I was like writing out the notes to you, I was like, "This is ridiculous." Like,
It's not. It's very thought out. So like, let's work Amelia, because she's the one you know the best, and we'll establish like what the system looks like for her, and then we'll go into Muriel and actually like build a voice.
okay, cool.
Um, and then ideally that will empower you to do it with your other characters. Um, for a second, let's talk about when you do this. No, let's hold that to the end. We will skip to the end. We will hold that to the end. So here you have, I'm laughing because I do this too. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 modulations of Amelia's voice. Again, not bad. It's just a lot to track. Does that make sense? And having
Yeah,
so much detail can be paralyzing. Um,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
is that how you're feeling when you try to modulate her voice? You're like, oh crap, I gotta pull out my chart and look at this giant list of.
Well, so I think this was really helpful for like in the beginning and creating a character, but now I'm in editing. So now I'm at the stage where I need to check that what I've done is what I meant to do and that it's consistent and that
Yeah,
her voice modulates. And this is not, having a really long list is not helpful for
it's
that.
not helpful. Yeah. So what I'll do when I get to where you're at in a story is Because what's going to happen when you write is you're going to have these big dramatic scenes, right? Where like, okay, this is where she's really feeling something. Either like we're getting to like intense vulnerability, or we're getting to like intense anger, or we're getting to like intense rage. Yeah, sorry, I needed to check something real quick. I was like, did I hit am I talking? Did I hit record for her? I did. So you're getting like intense anger or intense rage, right? Like, and you're gonna not, as you write, you're knowing where you're going, or as you edit, as you rewrite, you know where you're going in the scene. You're going to naturally, if you know where you're going and you know where you're starting emotionally, you're going to naturally get there, right? Emotionally, because you personally understand how emotions work on a subconscious level, right? Like we're people, we feel emotions, we're replicating how emotions work. So you'll get there. So you don't need all of the in-between modulations between the big and between where you're going and where you are, right? You can just have the big one and be like, okay, when she gets to here, she's got to sound like this. So does that make sense? So that's going to cut down some of these modulations in general. Other modulations, like if it's not a big shift, you can try, if you know the character voice, you can trust yourself to do it. You can trust yourself to do small shifts as you edit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that'll cut down some of this too. So the first thing I would want you to do, we're not going to edit this yet, but the first thing I want you to do is I want you to ask, like, okay, what are her big swings? Like, does she ever have a moment of like hugely being happy to the point where she's like giddy in the book? I'm not talking about like little happiness. I'm talking about like giddiness.
No.
Okay. I picked on that one because
Because you do.
I know you, and I know you've told me a little bit about the book, so I would be really shocked if there's a
Because like
giddy.
if you're exploring a trauma response, I don't think
Yeah,
happiness is
there's
coming in
not a
here
lot of
much.
giddy going on. So this actually is just taking up space in your brain, right? Like you don't
Yeah.
need it. How often is she well, what is the difference for you between self-conscious and nervous?
Mm-mm. Okay, that's hard to, so the
If it's hard to
the
define,
self
put them together.
well,
Right?
see, nervous is like not, there's not a huge element. Okay, words. It's not a huge element of nervousness, of risk. The self-conscious is more like, I guess it's actually like it's, I don't, I, words. What I mean is when she's in conflict, but
Mhm.
she isn't confident, like she's like basically she's being attacked, but she feels like verbally attacked, but she feels uh like, yeah, not confident.
Yeah, when she
Does
feels
that make any sense?
oh, it does. No, I'm with you. When she feels verbally attacked and she's not confident, does that make her nervous?
Oh, why do this to me?
Because I want you to put these two together. Because I'm trying to show you that, like,
Yeah.
when we're creating a tool to guide our editing, we're building a hammer, not a scalpel. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We're building
Yeah.
it because you don't have, like, man, if you want to spend the next 20 years writing this book, then let's build a whole bunch of scalpels. You can go in and you can dissect every sentence and every phrase, and you can like cut it. Like, that's amazing. If you want to do that,
Oh
fantastic.
my
We will build
God.
you so many
That fills me
scalpels.
with so much fear and
Yeah, but
dread.
you are writing a book that falls in a genre, right? Genre fiction. You're planning to write a series. The goal is to get this series out and then move to the next one. Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to give you some hammers to bang on things, not scalpels to like lit fic dissect. If you had come to me and you're like, I am wanting to be Mitchner and I am going to write the next great literary epic. I'm writing The Grapes of Wrath. right? Then I'd be like, well, yeah, we need to create some scalpels and we need to look at every single sentence and cut those. But you don't intend
Yeah.
people to like take your book, and this isn't a bad thing. You don't intend people to like take your book and like have it part of British literature class at a university setting, right? Like that's not what you're writing this for. The dream of this book is like people are going to love it, they're going to pass it to their friends, and someday it's going to be a Netflix series, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. So we need to build you some hammers, not some scalpels, so that you can
Yeah.
write and move, right? So write and move forward. So some of these we want to put together. Now let's talk, which is her, think through your plot. Where are her big swings? Does she get angry a lot?
Yeah.
Okay. So we want a good anger response, right?
Yeah.
Frustration and annoyance is a building to anger.
Yeah.
So we're just going to do anger,
Yeah.
right? Does she get vulnerable?
Not in. No, yeah, she does, actually. But
Okay.
it's not one of the, it's not like the top three.
Okay. What are the top three?
I would say like fear, anger, and the the one where she's babbling.
Okay.
What did they, the nervous, whatever we want to call that one.
Gotcha.
Defensive nervous.
Yeah. Fear, anger, and like anxiety. Why don't we call it? Because that kind of puts them together. Nervousness and self-consciousness. So let me pull up, I'm going to pull up a Jamboard real quick just to illustrate something for you. So as you conceptualize her voice, right, we're talking about baseline. When I say baseline, what that means is how she sounds in your head.
Mm-hmm.
That's the lock-in voice, right? Like this is where I'm going to lock into her voice when I go to write her. And then we want to get a fear response and anger response. Or I'm sorry, we said anxiety, didn't we? We didn't say fear. We said nervous, or we'll say nervous fear. We'll use your language, not mine. Nervous fear, nervous anxiety. What was the third one? Did we say vulnerable? No, that wasn't one of the top three.
No, I think there's fear, anger, and then anxiety is a
Okay,
third.
great. So
Does
I
that
mixed,
make?
I put two of them together.
It's all right.
There's no right answer here. It's whatever your.
Yeah. I'm sorry, it's just looking at that sounds like, really depressing that those are the three main emotions.
So look, you're writing dark fantasy. What do you expect? Your theme is trauma, Lynn. So this is her character, right? What we want to create is some kind of visual that you can glance at, that you're going to write on a page when you need to write Amelia, that you can glance at, and it gives you this kind of wheel.
Yeah.
Oh, that's weird that went in the front like that. I don't like that at all. Put that in the back. That gives you this kind of wheel, right?
Yeah.
So you just glance at it and go. Again, some people will put a picture in here. If you have like a picture of your character in mind, some people put a picture in there. I put a color in here to just help me like, oh yeah, that character's blue. Or I'll have body postures or whatever, something to just lock in. So let's talk about what we want to do with a character's baseline, right?
Mm-hmm.
I break a character voice into 5 pieces. And these are the 5 pieces that are on the page. I used to do 4, but then I ended up always saying like the first one is A and B. I was like, we should just do 5. That's silly. So 5 pieces. You don't have to use all 5 pieces for every character.
Okay.
Right. Again, this is about like, where's the voice going to pop for you? So the 5 pieces I use are the vocabulary the character is going to use, the topics the character is going to discuss, the body language the character use. A body language is a presentation of our personality and a way of communicating with others around us. So the body language we use is a part of our character voice. Utterance construction. Do you know what I mean by an utterance?
Like the bits that make up the sounds.
Yeah. So when a character speaks, let me see if I have a Google Doc I can pull up that is mine, not someone else's that I used. I do. I can just open my silly work in progress. This is literally just to demonstrate to you so that we have common language. So this is the Vela JP and I write. You can see here, come on, Chief, there's 6 of us. 6 of us and 1 of it, we can take it. The tattooed neck degree. That is the character tattoo neck. That is the utterance. Does that make sense? So when I say utterance construction, I mean when a character speaks, this is the utterance for Agent Rogers. We wait on Buck, Agent Rogers said. That's her utterance, right? It's how she's communicating. Now, this is Buck's utterance. Buck sighed and loosened his necktie around his neck. That's his utterance. Even though he doesn't vocalize anything, that body language is communicating to everybody around him how he feels and what his expectations are, right? So that's his utterance. So an utterance is the line of a character in the exchanges. Does that make sense?
Yes.
A segment is a group of utterances and exchanges. So this here, they are all talking about attacking this monster. It goes to right here. Here they're all they're talking about attacking this monster. After this, they're going to shift to talking about Buck's experience versus their experience. So this is my first segment, right? It's one topic or one emotional tone. And then the conversation turns on a topic or an emotional turn. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
For today, all we need to know is that when we talk about a segment, we're talking about a group, like a part of a conversation. When we talk about an utterance, we're talking about a character's single line. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So when we talk about what we're seeing on the page, there's the construction of the utterance, right? Like what their lines look like on the page. And then there's the construction of the segment. So how they participate in the conversation itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Again, 5 is a lot. We don't need to fill 5 out for every character. But what we want to do is you have these great personality notes. And all I've done is I've grouped them into the 5. And then we just want to ask, like, what does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So you had well-educated, extensive vocabulary. That's perfect. Right. So as you're editing, when you look at her voice and you read it on the page, you're like, is it? is what I wrote? Makes sounds like pff and ugh. Again, that's part of her vocabulary, right? Like she's responding with like, ugh. And then Scottish vocabulary, right? Like you're going to pull some Scottish words in there. So these are great. Like you've got a really strongly defined vocabulary for her. You know what her words on the page look like and feel like. And this starts when the reader sees this, it starts to determine her personality. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. You following me so far? You got any questions?
Yep. Yep. No, following so far.
Okay. Topics. You had argumentative, persuasive, positive language, confident, and assertive. Those are great descriptors. But let's talk about how they look on the page, right? Will express her opinion, right? That's argumentative. She's going to say what she thinks. Will push back.
Yep.
And persuasive will try to convince others. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now when you look on the page and you're reading like a section of conversation, you're reading a segment, and you're like, if she in this segment is like, I don't know, then you've fallen out of her voice.
Yeah.
Right? Because she's got opinions. She's going to express them. So she's not expressing opinions and she's not pushing back and she's not trying to convince others, then she's going to fall out of voice a little bit and she's going to feel weird to the reader. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. What did you mean by positive language?
Do you know what? I'm asking myself that.
Okay. This is why we do this exercise, right? And especially I said we were talking about when we do this. This is a good time. I don't do this up front, right? A lot of times I will write 2 to 3 scenes with a character, and then I'll stop and I'll be like, okay, what just came out of me?
Yeah.
And that's when I'll come and do this. And I start just like you started. I'll be like, what are the adjectives I'm going to use to describe this character? Assertive, confident, argumentative, opinionated. But then I have to take the next step and be like, okay, what does that look like on the page? Right? Like what does the character voice actually look like? And then I'm going to create what we're doing right now, which is a cheat sheet. So that I can glance at it and I know this is the character. Because the truth is, you're rarely going to have more than 4 characters talking in a scene. You might, right? Like you might go full on House in the Cerulean Sea where you've got like a table of 8 and all 8 voices are going, but it's super difficult. And most scenes are 2 to 3 characters.
Yeah.
Speaking. So a cheat sheet like this is great because you can just get those 2 to 3 characters. You can just glance at their voices and get them interacting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So to summarize, I usually do this. I'll write a couple scenes and then I'll do this. And then I really use it after that, I really start using it as a tool.
Yeah.
And then I start using it to edit. So positive language, if we don't know what it means, cut, right?
Yeah.
Cut it out. Confident and assertive. Does this express confident and assertive?
Yes.
Yeah. No, this is what this
no,
is what
it does. It's just like,
yeah.
oh yeah, cut
Yeah, no,
back.
don't
Okay.
like
Delete
you didn't do anything wrong. Like, but this is like we're narrowing down so that this is at a
Yeah.
glance, right? Like,
Yeah.
so we want to eliminate redundancy because we're just at a glance. Now, I would probably come back in here if I were doing mine and be like, I don't actually need the will,
Yeah.
right? Because again, like I'm trying to get this as few words as possible so I can literally just glance at it and roll.
Yeah.
Okay, you've got no body language for any of your characters.
Well, I do in the I promise it's in the writing. It's just
No,
not on the sheet.
I know it's in the page, but it's I have no doubt it's on the page. Body language per character is an expression of personality. So you want it connected to their voice, the things that they do. So she's a very the way you have her here. And one question though. She expresses her opinion, she pushes back, she tries to convince others. She's confident and assertive. But she doesn't always say what she thinks. How does that line up?
Because saying what she thinks isn't always going to get her what she wants.
Okay, so she's like judicious.
She's manipulative.
Okay, fair. So rather than tries to convince others, she's manipulating others. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think she probably does both.
Okay. So what I'm going to put down here, but it's not, she doesn't always say what she thinks in that she's scared to say what she thinks. It's an active decision for her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to put that down here in construction of segment. And we're going to say she speaks when it will help. Right. So if you're writing a conversation like this. Oh, what just happened? Okay, there we go. If you're writing a conversation like this is a conversation.
Oh, I can't. Sorry. I can see your Atticus now.
Yeah, that's what I wanted you to see.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. Let me find a different conversation that's easier to read. So when you're writing that's not helpful at all. I was hoping it would show me the actual anyway. When you're writing a conversation like this, you can see I've got 4 people and 5. Oh, this is a big conversation. I'm looking for a smaller one. Okay, this one's easier. I've got two people talking here, right? I've
Mm-hmm.
got Bob and Ethan. So when you're writing a conversation and you've got a segment, the question is, when does the character participate in that segment? Right? In a two-person conversation, they're going back and forth. So this question is less about when does she speak, and it'll be about more about how much does she share. Does that make sense? Because your character Amelia is manipulative, so it'll be less about in a two-person conversation. It's less about how often she speaks and more about what she says. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
In a large conversation where you've got, like in this one, I've got Trevor, I've got Ethan speaking here, Trevor again, Doris talks here, Ethan here, River, Alexis, River, Melissa, Trevor, Ethan, right? Like, so you can see I've got this huge cast here. Here is where that phrase, like participation in a segment or construction in a segment, comes into play, because we have to ask, when is our character going to join the conversation? Confident characters are going to speak as often as they can. Whenever they get a turn, they're going to talk, right? They're going to start conversations. They're going to end conversations. They're going to talk through the whole conversations. Shy characters are going to hide and are only going to get body language, right? Like, they're not going to talk unless somebody forces them to talk. Amelia is a fascinating character that you're putting together here because of this manipulative element to her. She's going to talk when it's most advantageous for her to do so. Do you have her having inner thoughts?
Yeah.
Okay, so her inner thoughts are going to run through the whole conversation, but it's her exterior voice that she's only going to talk, her vocalizations, she's only going to give when it's actually helpful. Does that make sense? So if you've got like a three-person
Yeah.
conversation, let's say you've got Amelia and then character B and character C, right? And they're debating something. Character B might talk first, and he might be like, we need to go and do this right now. And then Amelia might think like, that's the wrong move. Character C might be like, no, I agree. I think it's important to get out there right now. And Amelia might think like, how do I turn these guys around? And then character B might be like, and the forest path is probably the best path. And then character C could be like, no, the river path is probably the best path. And then you might have Amelia think, here it is, and have her vocalize, if you can't decide on the path, maybe it isn't the right time to go. Right. So you can see how, like, I'm getting her inner thoughts rolling through the whole conversation, but she's only going to vocalize when it's advantageous for her to do so. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Fast rhythm. How do you create fast rhythm on the page?
I know I do it.
When you say fast rhythm, are you talking about she speaks like a machine gun, or where she says a whole bunch really quick, or is it fast rhythm in that, like, she is really quick in a back and forth?
Oh, I mean, I was gonna be like, oh, she's quick in a back and forth, but actually, it would depend if it's useful to be quick in a back and forth. If she's relaxed, she'll be fast in a back. Yeah, her
Okay.
baseline is fast in a back and forth.
So we want shorter, tighter sentences.
But I'm sorry, that's a module.
We'll get to your
That's just
modulation.
a whole bunch of noise.
We'll get to your modulation in a second. We're just talking about baseline, right?
Yeah.
Baseline,
Yeah.
she's quick-witted, she's assertive, so she's fast on a thought, right? Which means short, tight sentences. Now, it's not shy, right? Because she's expressing her opinion, she's pushing back, and she's trying to convince others. So her topics are going to keep her from sounding shy, but she's going to have that short, tight sentences, and she's not afraid to take up a lot of space in a conversation if it's going to help her. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Whereas, like, I guess if you had a shy character, they're trying to speak as little as possible. So you
Yeah,
have
so
shorter sentences for that reason.
yeah, and a shy character we're going to give a lot of body language to. right? I don't care that we're not giving her any body language because
Oh,
she
okay.
doesn't need it, right? Like you've got a good, well-defined voice here. You don't need to define her body language. In fact, defining her body language at this point might actually constrict you.
Hmm.
Right. So we're just going to leave that blank for her. But if you have a shy character later, you're going to want a lot of body language, hands in pockets, looking down, right? Like, or a lot of shy people will look at the ceiling because they like don't notice me, right? Like, so whatever it is that she does, that a shy character does to push attention off of them, you'll want to put that in their body language because they're going to use a lot more body language than vocalizing what they're thinking. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got her. How do you feel about this voice?
Good.
Good.
Accurate.
You feel confident in this? Is this something that you could like write in the middle of a circle on your journal page
Yeah.
and be like, okay, I at least I have a hint of where I'm going here.
Yeah, you've got the foundations. Yeah.
Okay. When you write a modulation, I want you to think about your modulation. So let's say, I'm just going to space this down for a minute. Let's say so we can't see it. Let's say we're writing, right? We're going to modulate fear. Or what modulation do you want to do first?
No, fears.
Which modulation do we see the most? First reaction. Don't think too much about it.
Anger.
Anger. Modulate to anger. So when you modulate, you want to read each one of your things and you want to ask, does this one change? So does her vocabulary change when she's angry? Does she sound less educated?
Oh, okay. You want to embed it in the, yeah, I've not done that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Does she sound less educated?
So originally, I think she sounds more educated until the like extreme, and I know that that this is why I've
Yeah, so we're kind of
had
going to the
more.
extreme, right? Like,
Okay.
yeah. So when she modulates to anger, maybe smaller words.
Yeah,
Is that
I
fair?
think there probably are still quite educated words, but it's more like it would be like single words with a lot more.
So we're going from shorter sentences, and sometimes I'll write it this way. I'll say like shorter sentences, and I'll go just create my little arrow to explosive words.
Right.
Right. So in a normal setting, she might be like, no, I don't think that's how it is. But when she's angry, she might be like, no. Does that make sense?
What? Yeah, it does. And I'm realizing that I am getting myself a bit tied up in knots because I'm confusing like the utterance construction and the constructions per segment. So like when she's angry, she speaks a lot.
Okay,
like
great.
So it would be like it. I mean, it's not. I try to avoid doing like big paragraphs, but it's like closer to paragraphs.
Yeah. So when she's angry, it's like verbal vomit. She's just like letting it go.
Yeah, although like see, originally I'd wanted to make it that when she's angry, she tries to like think more before she speaks. But I don't think I actually wrote it that way.
Okay. It's something to explore. I'd go
Yeah.
find a scene where she's angry and I'd read it and see what
Yeah.
you did. Because you want to trust your gut, right? You don't want to fight against your gut.
Yeah.
You want to trust what your gut said. So go read a scene where she's angry. Now you have her freeze. One of your themes is freezing in trauma.
Yep.
When does her freeze response happen?
So I'm exploring freezing as a trauma response to like sexual violence or physical violence, but so
is she freezing when she's afraid?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to note that here because that's your theme. We don't want to lose it, right? So you said she's got explosive words, but she kind of loses control in the conversation itself. So she's going to talk more often. So rather than like speaking when it helps,
Yeah.
she's going to go to right like out of control speaking.
Yeah.
She's talking
Like
all the time.
if she's gonna offend someone, it's when she's angry.
Yeah.
Like
So you can see here that like what I'm doing to create a modulation is I'm taking what's there
yeah.
and I'm taking one step off of it.
Yeah.
And that way your character always sounds like your character because we don't want to lose their voice in a modulation. But at the same time, the voice changes so the reader can feel the emotional shift. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do modulate to fear. You said she freezes when she modulates to fear.
Yeah. So the modulation with fear is silence, but sometimes I do like disassociated thinking. So she'll, in her thoughts, she's like, I've got one scene where she's like in a state of shock and Thane's like helping her and is like talking calmly to her, and in her internal thoughts are like, why are you talking to me like this? Like I'm clearly, that's really weird, why are you doing that? And she's like disassociated. So yeah, it's her internal thoughts will be calm because she's disassociated.
Okay, so internal thoughts are calm and internalize the external, but speaks when it helps. Notice I'm going back to the baseline. Goes to silent. Right? What's her body language at this moment?
I mean, shaking.
Okay.
No, like, yeah, I've got, shaking, throwing up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put nauseous. There. Okay. Oh, thank you. Google Docs for spelling that word for me because it was never going to happen otherwise. So when we're building our cheat sheet, you want to get your baseline in here, and then you want to put this down at fear, right? And you want to write your modulation to fear. You want to write your modulation to anger, and then you'll do nervous as well. What I like about the character you're creating is that anger and fear feel very different.
Okay.
But they still feel like your character because we have a baseline that we're moving from. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's move to mural now. Are you okay to do that?
Yeah.
Can I leave you to do nervousness by yourself?
Yeah.
Okay. You are not allowed to do a fourth modulation for Amelia. Keep your baseline in your 3. Fair?
um.
You told me to act like a parent. I'm acting like a parent. You're not allowed to do it.
Okay.
Keep the 3 and edit this way. Okay. Her voice is going to modulate more. There's going to be times where she's conflicted. There's going to be times where she like doesn't know what to say and she's confused. You know the voice, you know your character, lock into the voice and then let it come naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trust.
Yeah. Trust yourself. Trust yourself as a creator and a writer. And you're not going to get it right the first time. You're going to do it. And then you're going to read the scene. You're like, oh, I was way off. And then just do it again. Right. Like that's, yeah, but trust yourself as a writer. Trust the voices in your head to actually like be your friends and help you with this. Okay, let's go to mural because that's the one you had. So we've got, let me put her on her own page break. insert a page break. Okay. And then Ragnall, get out of here. You are also in the way. It's the worst. Okay. Stupid antagonist. All right. So we've got Myrtle. She's like a Bridgerton Lady Danbury. What do you mean?
Have you seen the series Bridgerton?
I have, but it doesn't matter what I think that means. It matters what you think
Oh,
that
right.
means. What do you mean?
I see. I see what you mean. Very poised and has like commands a room.
Commands a room with what? She walk into it, she
Presence?
screams, "Pay attention to me!"
No, just like is used to being the most revered person in a room, and so walks in expecting that. And if that doesn't happen,
Gotcha.
she'd be pissed.
Yeah. Okay. What else?
What else?
What else do you mean by lady? What else do you mean by Lady Danbury? Now you've put a name here.
I know.
This is a
I
good
don't
place to use
normally do.
This is a good place to put a picture. You've already associated her with another character. You might want to use a picture of Lady Danbury to lock in. And what I would do when I do that is above the baseline, I would cut out a picture of Lady Danbury and paste it into your journal right there. But
Okay.
you've got to figure out your own tools and what works for you. So just my recommendation. Anything else about Lady Danbury that you like about this voice?
Like the word severe comes to mind. Like,
Yeah, good word. Severe. Okay. You've got this line here. Muriel visits Mariel to get information on how to go home and discovers she's in a relationship with her late aunt. Now, is Muriel a character we see a lot?
no.
Is she in more than 5 scenes?
No.
Okay. So you just need a baseline.
Okay.
You don't have to worry about her modulations. We don't see her enough to actually pick up on her voice modulating or not.
Oh man, this is cutthroat.
Look, we got to make this easy. Writing is hard enough, right? We got to make this easy for you.
Yeah,
So,
like an actual usable tool. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
that would be good.
yeah, I could give you a Swiss Army knife where you could pull 50 things out. And again, we could create the scalpel where you have to like go to each sentence and question, like, does this sentence do what I want this sentence to do? But that's not the kind of book you're writing. So, like, why would we do that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got some more descriptions here. Answers questions with questions, eloquent, more purple language, and firm. I'm just going to pull that stuff up for right now and put it up here because this is our initial brainstorming, is what we just did. So now that we've done our initial brainstorming on a voice, I would recommend, like, if you were actually doing this on your own, go write a scene.
Mm-hmm.
And make sure that voice comes out how you want it to come out, because you'll get a better feel for the character when you write it out. Right. Once you've written it out, then you want to come back and do this again and actually break this voice down. So we're just going to put our things in here. Again, we don't have to define all of them, but we want to put them down just so we know what we're working with. Utterance, construct, and participation in a segment. Participation, I can spell. Okay. So we're going to break down vocabulary, topics, body language, participation in a segment. Again, we don't need to use all of them. You already said one, poised, which I wrote as posed, which I'm sure is the same thing. What does poised body language look like to you?
Tall, elegant, and stiff.
Okay. Stiff. Ooh, why is that bold? That's silly. Stiff movements. Maybe like you said tall. I might write like good posture.
Yeah.
These are things that, because she's not a point of view character, these are things that other people are going to notice about her. Right. Or you might have her like when she's responding to someone, instead of responding vocally, you might have like straightened her back. Right. Like,
yeah, I do have that. So
Perfect. Right? That's a move. And it's a move you want her to repeat, right? Like you want her, whenever she's not going to talk, she's going to straighten her back, right? Like, so it's that like move that becomes part of her character voice that communicates that she's intentionally poised. Any other body language that comes to mind?
A raised eyebrow.
Ooh, perfect. I love it. All right. So we've got really strong body language for her. We've said that she is severe and firm. What does that sound like?
Like makes demands and commands rather than like the opposite. Forgot my words. Yeah, we'll demand something rather than ask for something and command it.
Yeah. So just go ahead and put in 2 topics. No questions. Right? Because you're creating a hammer that you're going to bang. Does that mean at some point she might ask a question? Sure. Right? Like these aren't like rules you have to follow, they're guidelines. So, but when you're looking at it, if you have a thing where she's like asking 20 questions, you got to make sure that like that's how you want it. That should make you pause and go like, wait, is this in her voice? Right? And you might be like, yeah, it is. It actually works right here for this topic, for this moment. Her like pounding somebody with questions actually works. But in general, as a rule, she's going to make demands, not questions.
Yeah, so I mean, like above, I've got answers questions with questions. Because like
Yeah.
I wanted it to be like she's she's very much controlling the conversation. So people will ask her for information and she's almost I can't decide how much it's her wanting them to figure stuff out for themselves and how much is her getting information from them by like pushing it back and asking a question.
Might be a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Yeah. So instead of no questions, I'm gonna replace their uses questions to control the convo.
Okay.
Right. What do you mean by purple language?
Like the opposite of why say a sentence in one word. Like, yeah, so why say in one word what you can say in 5?
Okay.
I kind of mean.
So we're gonna have multiple sentences per utterance and superfluous words or extra words. Right. So you just know if you've got an utterance in her voice that's a single sentence, you should question that utterance. You should be like, oh, does that actually sound like her? Now, sometimes it's fine. She's not always going to do this. Again, guidelines, not rules, but it gives you something to be like, oh, here's how I lock into her voice. I know that when I see her voice on the page, I should see like 2 to 3 sentences every time she talks. She's got a lot to say. Right.
Yeah.
How often does she talk? Is she waiting for others or is she leading conversations?
She is waiting, like she uses silence as well to control the conversation. So.
Gotcha. So she responds. Responds. There we go. And she uses silence. That's where that body language is going to come in. Right. All right. So we've got 4 of these filled out. That usually feels pretty good to me. I'm usually like, okay, this gives me enough to lock into a character voice. Do you feel like that'll help you lock into this character voice?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can fill out vocabulary if you want to, especially if there's like a special phrase she says, like that's something I'd put into vocabulary, like if every time somebody complains about something, she says, let them eat cake. And then she laughs. Yeah. I'd put that phrase in here so I don't forget it, especially when you're writing a series. So what's great about this, Lynn, is that across a series, if you keep these voice sheets, if she comes back in book 3 You can, you know, which you'll be writing in 2 years. Who knows if you'll remember what she sounds like. She comes back in book 3, you can flip to this, open it up, and be like, there she is. Like, that's what she sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I need.
Yeah. Okay. Do you feel empowered to do this with your own characters?
Yeah, but I already know I'm gonna add a modulation to this voice, so
That's totally fine. It's about what you're comfortable with. I gave you
yeah.
5 categories. Here's the dirty truth. There is no spoon, right? Just like in the Matrix, where they're like, how are you bending that spoon? And the kid's like, the secret is understanding there is no spoon. The categories don't matter. They're just a way to sort your
Yeah.
information, right? Like, it doesn't actually matter if you put it in topics or vocabulary. It's just about using a framework to help you think through things. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. What else? I hope I've set you up for success. I know I threw a lot at you today.
No, for sure.
What burning questions do you have, or what else do we need to talk about before we send you off to edit your manuscript?
What burning questions do I have? Ba-dum-bum-bum. I don't have a burn, so it's not a question. I just like it's sorry, I just had, those people like, it's more of a comment than a question, and you're
Hmm,
just like, douche, go
totally
away.
fine. We'll count it in your voice. When
And
asked for
then
questions, Lynn makes comments.
um it's not a question, it's just that I've like written myself into like a bit of a problem in that, because it's like a portal story. So Amelia's coming into a new world, and then it's like to to deal with the language. I've got the language in the new world being a um like a more formal language that not everyone speaks.
Okay.
Um I don't really have a question except,
Just like, what in the hell do I do with that?
yeah.
Yeah. I'd assign it to specific characters.
Yeah.
Characters that speak the new language, note that in their vocabulary.
Yeah.
Uses formal language. Characters
Mm-hmm.
that don't, note that in their vocabulary.
Yeah.
Uses, colloquial language, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't use the word colloquial because that's pretentious, and who would actually use that word? But uses normal language, like drop that in
Mm-hmm.
there. So yeah, I would note it per character so that you can kind of sort, like, okay, these are the characters that speak the highbrow language, and these are the characters that speak everyday language. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
Because it speaks something to who they are. So you want to include it in their character voice. If you separate it by character voice, you don't necessarily have to worry about when it's happening and when it's not happening, because it's happening when that character is on the scene. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Um, moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
my recommendation to you is do not sit down and try to do every character.
See, your overall advice is to try and make life easier for myself, and I feel like you don't understand who I am fundamentally as a human being.
It's totally fair. But I want you to stay focused on writing, because you
Yeah.
can get lost in creating a character vibe. You can lose
Yeah.
months, right? So and again, Lynn, it's got to work for you.
Yeah.
But
No, this is definitely
yeah,
gonna make things easier, and it's definitely the way to do it.
I would look at a couple scenes and do the characters you need, because you're writing them down. You'll have them for later. So I do a character by scene. Does that make sense? Rather than like trying to think through the entire story and get all the characters done at one time, focus on scene by scene.
Yeah.
Here's
Oh,
my
I have a
scene.
question.
Oh yeah,
Sorry.
no, you're good.
Um, what do you have any tips on if you're building a character voice and you're filling in the modulations, and you're like, this, like, this is what character B does. Like to make sure
Mhm.
I mean, in a romance, like, and you've got fewer characters, I don't think this would be a problem. But because I'm doing fantasy and I've got like a larger cast, I can see myself repeating patterns.
Yeah, you want their baselines different.
Oh yeah, okay, that's
Yeah.
such a simple answer. Yeah,
No,
of course.
it's not. It's actually a more complicated answer. So the key, you got to get these built first,
Yeah.
right? Once you have these built, you can compare and contrast. They're not all going to have the same modulations either, right? Like Thane may not have the same emotional experiences as Amelia does. Some of them will, some of them won't. But if you have
Yeah.
different baselines and you build your modulations off your baseline, the modulations will sound different as well.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah, that
sense?
makes sense. Yeah,
So
and then I'm
like,
guessing you can also have quite interesting conflicts if you have two characters that are trying to command the conversation.
oh, it's
Like that
fantastic.
would that's yeah.
Yeah. If you have two shy characters, it makes a really fascinating conversation because neither of them want to talk. So like there's a lot of like moving around and body language and like short, like, I don't know, what do you think? Like there's a
Yeah.
lot of like, but it makes fun scenes, right? Like that's part of what makes texts really rich is when we have diverse character voices, because the conflict in the scene is actually driven by the diversity of the character voices and how they're all handling the same problem. Because what's static in a scene is what's happening, right? What changes in the scene is how the different characters are responding to it. So if you can get a diverse set of baseline voices, you build the modulation off of the baseline. If you've got three characters that are scared, but they have different baseline voices, then their fear is all going to look different too. And then how they respond in fear makes the fun scene, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, if you have one character that shuts down in fear and freezes, but another character who's super confident goes more confident in fear, and it's like, when they're scared they become like super bravado, then that creates a fun scene. Or if you have a character that freezes in fear, oh man, I was just watching Hunters on Amazon. Like, talk about great diverse character voices. It's a rough show. It's a
Oh, I'm not gonna watch it
super
then.
violent show. It's
Not
about
good.
Jews hunting Nazis. So,
No.
but there's a scene in a like steam room where two characters walk in that have, one character has a ton of bravado and is like a super confident character, and one character is very controlled. And so they walk into this terrifying room. The one with a lot of bravado shrinks and like panics. The one that's cold and calculated, the modulation of his voice is to be more cold and calculated. Right. So like the bravado shifts, like what shifts are the topics of the bravado character. The bravado character usually is talking about himself and how amazing he is. But then when he's afraid, all of a sudden he's talking about his own fear and how scared he is. And his body language shifts, but his voice is the same. It's just the topics and the body language. Whereas the controlled character actually becomes more controlled. So all of a sudden you get this scene of this odd couple pairing where in fear they become even more odd couple pairing, and it creates this big, like, with the controlled character looking at the other one like, pull yourself together, right? Like it's this, yeah, but it's that conflict that's created through the changing character voices that helps create a really dynamic scene.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love the
but
idea of thinking of like the kind of external plot as static and the characters and their voices as the change and the
yeah, I mean, the old adage of like, what is a scene? Well, you put your character in a tree and you throw rocks at them. Like that's that's kind of like, all the characters are in a tree and you're throwing rocks at them in every scene. And what makes the scene dynamic is how they're all responding to each other and the rocks being thrown
yeah,
at them.
exactly.
Yeah. All right. I hope this was helpful today.
It really was. Thank
Good.
you.
I'm going to hit stop and then we can talk a little bit more.
Okay, dokes.